Welcome back to Lore to Dream. Tonight, we're descending into the depths of a Hallownest, a fallen kingdom buried beneath the earth, where ancient light clashes with primordial darkness. We're exploring one of the most haunting tales in gaming, a story about forgotten gods, broken promises, and a plague of golden light that turned a thriving civilization into a kingdom of hollow shells and wandering ghosts. This is the story of the infection and the radiance, the moth goddess whose light became a curse, whose memory became a weapon, and whose rage shattered an entire world. This isn't a simple tale of good versus evil. Nothing in Hallownest is that straightforward. The deeper you venture into these ruined tunnels, the more you realize that every character, every faction, every choice exists in shades of grey. The Radiance was a creator goddess, abandoned by her own children. The Pale King was a visionary ruler who sacrificed thousands to save millions. The infection itself is not a disease in any conventional sense, but the manifestation of a god's desperate attempt to be remembered. As you drift off tonight, we'll walk through the crumbling halls of the City of Tears, stand at the edge of the abyss where light fears to tread, and witness the collision between two higher beings whose conflict would doom an entire kingdom. We'll see how worship can become betrayal, how memory can become plague, and how the desperate attempt to contain divine fury led only to deeper tragedy. The ruins of Hallownest still whisper their secrets to those who listen. The orange glow of infected eyes pierces the darkness. The dream nail cuts through the veil between waking and sleep. And somewhere, trapped within a sealed vessel, bound by chains of pale light, a goddess screams her rage into the dreams of every living thing. So settle in, close your eyes, and let's explore the infection that destroyed Hallownest, the goddess who created it, and the impossible burden placed on a creature meant to have no mind to think, no will to break, and no voice to cry suffering. Before the arrival of the Pale King, before the construction of great cities and sprawling highways, the lands that would become Hallownest were home to countless tribes of bugs living in their natural state. They existed without higher thought, without sapience, without the burden of consciousness. They simply were creatures of instinct moving through an ancient world. Among these tribes were the moths, and unlike the others, they had already awakened. They had been granted consciousness, not by any Wyrm or king, but by their creator, a higher being of pure light who existed in the realm of dreams. The Radiance was not a bug, not in any conventional sense. She was something far older, far greater, a being of brilliant golden light, her form resembling a moth, but composed entirely of dream essence and radiance. Where other higher beings represented concepts tied to the physical world, the Radiance embodied light itself, the luminous force that exists in dreams, in thought, in consciousness. She was the sun that shone in sleeping minds, the warm glow at the center of awareness. The moths were her children in the truest sense. They hadn't evolved into consciousness. They had been born from her light, crystallized from her essence into physical form. Each moth carried within it a fragment of their creator's radiance, a spark of that original brilliant light. They were extensions of her, beloved children who had emerged from dream into waking reality. In those ancient days before Hallownest, the moths worshipped their creator with devotion absolute and pure. They tended shrines filled with her light. They studied the nature of dreams, learning to walk between the waking world and the realm where the Radiance dwelled. They crafted the dream nail, a sacred weapon capable of cutting through the veil separating sleep from consciousness, allowing its wielder to peer into minds and gather the essence that dreams are made of. Their culture revolved entirely around their goddess, around the preservation of her memory, around the maintenance of the connection between her realm and theirs. They were content in this worship, basking in the light that had spawned them, honoring the source of their existence with every breath. The Radiance, for her part, loved her children. This is crucial to understand. She was not some distant, uncaring deity. She had created the moths intentionally, had given them life and consciousness as gifts. She existed among them not as a tyrant demanding worship, but as a benevolent presence, a warm light in their dreams, a comforting awareness at the edge of their thoughts. The relationship between creator and created was one of genuine affection, a bond forged in the very essence of their being. The moths remembered their goddess because they had been born from her, because her light was woven into their very existence, because forgetting her would be like forgetting themselves. But this idyllic existence, this perfect harmony between deity and devotee, would not last. Change was coming to the lands around the moth's territory. Something vast and ancient was burrowing through the mountains, crossing wastelands, drawing ever closer to the place that would become the heart of a new kingdom. The age of the Radiance's undisputed reign was ending. Another light was approaching, and this light came bearing promises that would shatter the moth's devotion and set in motion events that would doom an entire civilization. The Pale King was not always a king, and he was certainly not always small enough to walk among bugs. He began his existence as a Wyrm, one of the ancient beings who had existed long before the current age. These worms were colossal creatures, larger than mountains, serpentine and powerful, possessing the ability to pull lesser beings into their thrall. They had a kind of gravitational presence, an aura that drew creatures to them, that made other life forms want to serve, to follow, to worship. The worms also possessed something rare among higher beings: the power of foresight, the ability to glimpse possible futures, to see threads of fate before they fully formed. The Wyrm who would become the Pale King traveled far, burrowing through stone and earth, crossing vast distances until finally arriving at Kingdom's Edge, a desolate place of ash and ancient remains at the border of what would become Hallownest. There, in that ashen wasteland, the Wyrm underwent a transformation unlike anything the world had seen before. Through a process that remains mysterious even to those who studied it most carefully, the Wyrm died to its old form. Its massive shell was cast off, left behind as an immense corpse that would remain for ages, becoming a landmark at the very edge of the known world. Within that cast-off shell, something new emerged. Not another Wyrm, but something smaller, more refined. The Pale King was born. This transformation was more than physical. The Pale King had reduced his form intentionally, reshaping himself to match the scale of the bugs that inhabited this land. He had made himself small enough to walk among them, to rule them, to build a civilization with them as his subjects, rather than simply crushing them beneath his weight or commanding them through raw power. But he retained his nature as a higher being, his power to influence minds, his gift of foresight, and most importantly, his ability to grant something unprecedented to the mindless bugs of this realm: true consciousness. The Pale King's light was different from the Radiance's. Where hers was warm and golden, a light of dreams and comfort, his was cold and silver, a light of clarity and awakening. The Radiance's light existed primarily in the dream realm. The Pale King's light existed in the waking world, where the Radiance had created consciousness in a single tribe, allowing them to emerge from her essence already aware. The Pale King could bestow consciousness on creatures who had never known thought. He could take a mindless bug living purely on instinct and elevate it, grant it sapience, gift it with the burden and blessing of self-awareness. This was his offering, his promise to the creatures of this land. Worship me, follow me, build a kingdom under my rule, and I will give you minds to think with, language to speak with, purpose beyond mere survival. The bugs of Hallownest, as it was now being called, accepted his offer. How could they not? They were being offered something beyond imagination, the chance to rise above their base existence, to become something more than creatures of pure instinct. Tribe after tribe accepted the Pale King's rule. They received his gift of consciousness and immediately understood the magnitude of what they had been given. They saw him as a divine creator, a God King who had lifted them from darkness into enlightenment. They built cities to honor him, carved his seal into every structure, created king's idols to facilitate their worship, and devoted their entire civilization to him and his vision of an eternal kingdom. Among those who accepted the Pale King's rule were the moths. This is where betrayal enters the story, where the seeds of the infection were first planted, though no one could have known it at the time. The moths, who already possessed consciousness granted by the Radiance, were nevertheless drawn to this new light. Perhaps it was the Pale King's Wyrm nature, that ancient power to pull bugs into his thrall. Perhaps it was the promise of something new, the allure of joining this rising kingdom and being part of something grand. Perhaps it was simply the passage of time and the fading of old devotions in the face of new opportunities. Whatever the reason, the moths turned their backs on the Radiance. They forsook the light that had spawned them. They ceased their worship, stopped tending her shrines, abandoned the dream rituals that had connected them to their creator. Most devastating of all, they forgot her. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually over generations. The memory of the Radiance faded from the moth's collective consciousness. The goddess who had created them from her own essence became a half-remembered dream, then a vague legend, then nothing at all. The moths joined Hallownest as fully committed subjects of the Pale King, their ancient devotions becoming mere footnotes in a culture now focused entirely on their new ruler. The Radiance, trapped in the dream realm, felt this abandonment with an intensity impossible for mortal minds to comprehend. She had created the moths. They were her children, born from her light, carrying her essence within them. Their worship wasn't demanded through tyranny or fear. It was the natural expression of their connection to her, the acknowledgement of the bond between creator and created. To have them turn away, to have them forget her existence, was a wound that cut to the very core of her being. Imagine creating consciousness itself, giving life to beings who love and revere you, not because they must, but because recognition of you is woven into their very nature, and then having them choose to sever that connection, to actively forget you exist, to replace you in their hearts with another. But the Radiance was a higher being, an entity of immense power existing in the realm of dreams. She could not simply cease to be because she was forgotten. The Radiance still existed, still possessed all her power, still maintained her presence in the dream realm. But now that presence was tinged with something new, something that had not existed in her before: rage, betrayal, and an overwhelming desire to be remembered at any cost. The moths had forgotten her, but memory is a strange thing. Even forgotten things leave traces, echoes, impressions in the deep places of the mind where conscious thought cannot reach. The Radiance was not truly gone from the moths' minds. She was merely buried, suppressed, pushed down beneath layers of new thoughts and new devotions. But buried things can resurface, and suppressed things can break free. In the dream realm, the Radiance began to stir. Her light, once warm and comforting, took on a harsh quality, becoming sharp and demanding. She would not allow herself to be forgotten. She would not permit her children to abandon her without consequence. If they would not remember her willingly, if they would not choose to worship her as they once had, then she would force them to remember. She would reach into their dreams, bypass their conscious minds, and drag her memory back into their awareness. She would remind them of her existence, make them see her light again, make them acknowledge what they had tried to forget. The Radiance began reaching out, sending tendrils of her essence into the dreams of Hallownest's inhabitants, searching for any crack in the armor of forgetfulness, any gap through which her light could pour. And she found one. Not all memory had been erased. In the deepest places of the moths' minds, in the unconscious spaces where instinct and ancient knowledge dwell, fragments of the Radiance remained. Dim recollections, wordless awareness, the faint impression that something bright and important had once existed and been lost. These fragments became footholds. The Radiance seized upon them, amplified them, used them as doorways through which she could push her presence. The moths began to dream of light, of a goddess they couldn't quite remember, but couldn't quite forget. These dreams were uncomfortable, insistent, demanding attention and recognition. The dreams spread. From the moths, the Radiance's influence began leaking into other bugs throughout Hallownest. They would sleep and suddenly find themselves in the presence of brilliant golden light, unable to look away, unable to wake, held captive by a force that demanded they remember, that insisted they acknowledge her existence. At first, these were just dreams, disturbing perhaps, but still contained within the realm of sleep. But the Radiance's power was growing, fed by the very attention she was forcing bugs to give her. The dreams became more intense, more invasive, more difficult to distinguish from waking reality. And then the dreams began manifesting in the physical world. This was the birth of the infection. The infection was unlike any disease Hallownest had ever encountered. It wasn't spread through contact or proximity. It didn't require any physical vector. The infection moved through dreams, through consciousness itself. A bug would begin having dreams of the radiance, visions of brilliant light that they couldn't escape, couldn't dismiss, couldn't forget. The dreams would intensify, occurring more frequently, lasting longer, becoming more vivid and all-consuming. The bug would find itself thinking about the light even when awake, unable to focus on anything else, drawn constantly back to thoughts of that demanding golden radiance. Their eyes would begin to glow orange, the color of the infection, the physical manifestation of the radiance's light burning through them. Orange pustules would form on their bodies, glowing sacs of liquid light that pulsed with the rhythm of dreams. But the true horror of the infection wasn't physical. It was mental, psychological, spiritual. The infection stripped away everything the Pale King had given. His gift of consciousness, of self-awareness, of individual thought and choice. All of it was burned away by the radiance's light. Infected bugs lost their personalities, their memories, their sense of identity. They regressed to a state even more primitive than the mindless existence they had known before the Pale King's arrival. Infected bugs became aggressive, hostile, driven by primal urges amplified by the radiance's rage. They would attack anything that moved, lashing out with strength enhanced by the infection, but without any of the skill or strategy that intelligence would provide. The infection was the radiance, forcing herself back into the consciousness of Hallownest. If her children would not remember her willingly, she would make them remember by consuming their minds entirely. The infected became living monuments to her existence, their glowing eyes proclaiming that, yes, the radiance was real. Yes, she demanded acknowledgement. Yes, she would not be forgotten. The tragedy is that this wasn't what the radiance wanted. She had been a benevolent creator, loving her moths, content to exist as a warm presence in their dreams. But betrayal and abandonment had transformed her love into rage, her light into a weapon, her desire for acknowledgement into a destructive force that would ultimately destroy the very kingdom that had forgotten her. The citizens of Hallownest tried everything to fight the infection. Scholars studied it, trying to understand its nature and find a cure. They performed rituals, spoke prayers, erected barriers both physical and magical. Nothing worked. The infection couldn't be stopped by conventional means because it wasn't a conventional disease. It existed in dreams, in the space between waking and sleeping, in the realm of consciousness itself. You couldn't quarantine it because it spread through awareness. You couldn't cure it with medicine because it wasn't destroying the body. It was consuming the mind and replacing it with raw light and rage. The 5 great knights, the most powerful warriors in Hallownest, found themselves helpless. How do you fight an enemy without form? How do you strike at something that exists in dreams? How do you protect your kingdom when the threat comes from within the very minds of your citizens? The Pale King, with his gift of foresight, understood the true nature of what they were facing. This wasn't a plague that had emerged randomly. This was a higher being, asserting her will, a goddess demanding recognition, an ancient light that refused to be forgotten. The Radiance could not be killed, not in any conventional sense. She existed in the dream realm, beyond the reach of nails and spells. Even if you could somehow access her realm, she was a god, possessed of power that dwarfed any mortal weapon. But the Pale King also knew something else. The Radiance was contained in dreams. If you could seal away the source of the infection, trap it somehow in a place where it couldn't spread, then you could stop the plague without needing to destroy its creator. This is where the Pale King's plan began to form, a plan born of desperation and terrible necessity. What could contain a higher being? What vessel could hold the Radiance, keeping her trapped, preventing her light from reaching out into the dreams of Hallownest's inhabitants? It would need to be incredibly powerful, strong enough to withstand the constant assault of divine will trying to break free. It would need to be immune to the infection, capable of holding the Radiance without succumbing to her influence. Most importantly, it would need to be empty, completely, utterly hollow, because the infection spread through consciousness, through thought and memory and awareness. If you could create a being with no mind to infect, no thoughts to corrupt, no consciousness for the Radiance to seize upon, then that being could hold her indefinitely. The Pale King needed a vessel, something with the strength to contain a god, but without the thoughts that would make it vulnerable to that god's influence. He needed something born of void, that primordial darkness that existed as the antithesis to light, the ancient force that dwelled in the deepest place in Hallownest, far below the kingdom, at the bottom of the abyss. The void was the natural enemy of the Radiance. Where she was light and consciousness and presence, the void was darkness and emptiness and absence. A being made of void would be anathema to her, immune to her light, capable of containing her without being consumed. But how do you create a being of void while also giving it the strength and form needed to serve as a prison for a god? The answer was horrible in its necessity. The Pale King went to the White Lady, his consort, the root being who dwelled in the Queen's gardens. Together, they would have children. But these children would not be raised in the palace, would not grow up as princes and princesses of Hallownest. These children would be taken to the abyss, that lightless place at the bottom of the world, where the void pooled in darkness absolute. They would be left there, still in their eggs, exposed to the void's consuming emptiness. The void would hollow them out, would fill their shells with darkness, would strip away whatever mind or will or thoughts they might have developed. They would become vessels, beings with the shells of the Pale King's royal children, but with nothing inside except darkness and emptiness. The plan was put into motion. The White Lady, in sorrow and duty, laid countless eggs. The Pale King took these eggs to the abyss, placing them in a location that would come to be known as the birthplace. There, in absolute darkness, the eggs hatched. Small beings emerged, horned like their father, but filled with void instead of life. Most of them died immediately. The void consumed them completely, collapsing their shells, leaving nothing but empty husks that would litter the floor of the abyss for ages to come. These were the failures, the vessels that were not strong enough to maintain form while being completely hollow inside. Their empty shells would pile up by the thousands, a memorial to the Pale King's desperate plan and its terrible cost. But some survived. Some few managed to maintain their physical form while being filled with void. These vessels climbed out of the birthplace, ascending the sheer walls of the abyss in a desperate attempt to reach the light above, to escape the darkness that had birthed them. Most fell, their bodies tumbling back down into the darkness, joining the thousands of failed siblings at the bottom. But a handful made it, emerging at the top where the Pale King waited, examining each one with the critical eye of a creator judging his creations. He was looking for something specific, a pure vessel, one that was completely hollow inside, with no mind to think, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering, a being so empty that the radiance would have nothing to grasp, no consciousness to infect, no thoughts to corrupt. The Pale King believed he found it. One vessel climbed from the abyss and stood before him, utterly still, utterly silent, showing no sign of thought or emotion or awareness. This one seemed perfect. The Pale King took this vessel and raised it, trained it, allowed it to grow. It became powerful, learning to wield a nail, developing the strength that would be needed to contain a god. The Pale King named it the Hollow Knight, for it was hollow, and it would be the kingdom's salvation, the knight who would save Hallownest by taking the infection into itself. The rest of the vessels, those who had survived but were deemed impure, were left in the abyss or escaped into Hallownest to wander as hollow shells, their purpose unfulfilled, their existence forgotten by their creator. When the Hollow Knight was fully grown, the plan was ready. 3 bugs volunteered to become dreamers, to enter into an eternal sleep that would use their power to seal the Hollow Knight away, ensuring the seal could never be broken except through their destruction. Monomon, the teacher, a scholar who had devoted her life to understanding Hallownest, offered herself without hesitation. Lurien the Watcher, who had overseen the City of Tears from his spire, agreed to sleep eternally to protect the kingdom. And Hera the Beast, Queen of Deepnest, struck a bargain with the Pale King. She would become a dreamer if he would give her a child. This child would be Hornet, daughter of 2 higher beings, and she would play a crucial role in the events to come, though none could know it yet. The dreamers entered their eternal sleep. Their consciousness spread across the seals that would bind the Hollow Knight. The Hollow Knight stood in the temple of the Black Egg, chains of pale light wrapping around it, binding it in place. And then came the moment of truth. The radiance was drawn into the Hollow Knight, her presence pulled from the dream realm and sealed within the vessel's shell. The Hollow Knight became a living prison, containing the goddess within its supposedly hollow form. The door to the Black Egg was sealed, marked with 3 masks representing the dreamers who held it closed. The infection stopped spreading. The orange glow faded from infected bugs' eyes. Hallownest began to heal. For a time, it worked. The infection was gone. The kingdom recovered. Citizens returned to their lives. The economy resumed. Culture flourished. The Pale King had saved his kingdom through terrible sacrifice, through the death of thousands of his own children, through the eternal imprisonment of 3 of his most devoted subjects, through the sealing away of a god. But it was necessary, and it had worked. Hallownest was safe. The infection was contained. The kingdom would last eternally, just as the Pale King had promised when he first granted consciousness to its inhabitants. But the Pale King had made a fatal error. The Hollow Knight was not pure. It was not truly hollow. Somewhere in its supposedly empty shell, something existed. A thought, an idea, a feeling. The Hollow Knight had been raised by the Pale King, trained by him, prepared for its purpose by him. In the path of pain, at the culmination of the brutal trial, there is a memory that reveals everything. The Pale King standing with the small Hollow Knight, looking down at it. And the vessel looks back. It looks up at its father. In that moment of connection, something formed. An emotional bond, perhaps. A desire to fulfill its purpose, to live up to expectations, to make its father proud. The Hollow Knight wanted to be what its father needed it to be. That want, that desire, that tiny spark of consciousness was enough. The Hollow Knight was tarnished. It had an idea instilled. It was not pure. The Radiance, sealed within this imperfect vessel, found that crack in the armor. That tiny spark of consciousness gave her something to work with, a foothold from which she could exert her influence. She was a higher being, a goddess of immense power, and she was trapped in close proximity with the one thing that could give her leverage, an actual mind. It would take time, perhaps years or decades, but the Radiance began working on that crack, widening it, pushing through it, slowly reasserting her presence. The Hollow Knight fought back, trying to contain her, trying to remain sealed. But it was fighting a losing battle. You cannot imprison light within a cracked vessel. Eventually, inevitably, the light would leak through. The infection returned to Hallownest. This time, there would be no recovery. The shell of the Hollow Knight cracked, and orange light seeped through, spreading once more into the kingdom. The forgotten crossroads became infected, filled with mutated bugs, dripping with infection, pustules of orange goo blocking paths, the sharp smell of the plague hanging heavy in the air. The City of Tears, that architectural marvel, fell silent as its inhabitants succumbed. Deepnest, already dark, became something worse as infection mixed with the dangers that had always lurked there. The fungal wastes grew twisted. The Crystal Peak became home to infected miners, their husks wandering endlessly with glowing orange eyes. Hallownest, the eternal kingdom, was dying. The Pale King knew his plan had failed. He had foresight after all. He could see what was coming. The Hollow Knight was breaking. The infection would consume everything. His kingdom, his eternal promise, his grand civilization built on the gift of consciousness, all of it would fall to the Radiance's rage. The weight of this knowledge, the certainty of his kingdom's doom, the understanding that he had sacrificed thousands of his own children for a solution that would ultimately fail. It was too much. The Pale King retreated into his white palace, and through means that remain mysterious, he and his palace vanished from the physical world, becoming accessible only through dreams. The king who had promised eternity to his subjects abandoned them in their darkest hour. Whether he died or simply fled into the dream realm to hide from the consequences of his failure, no one knows. The Pale King was gone, and with him went any hope of a new solution. The kingdom fell into ruin. The infection spread unchecked, Hallownest's citizens either succumbed to the plague, becoming hostile husks, or fled into hiding, trying to survive in the ruins of their once great civilization. The City of Tears lived up to its name, rain falling eternally on abandoned streets. The infrastructure crumbled, the trams stopped running, the stag stations fell silent. Elderbug, one of the few remaining uninfected bugs, sat in Dirtmouth, the small town above the ruins, waiting for someone, anyone, to arrive who might offer hope. The 5 great knights were scattered or dead. Ogrim, the dung defender, waited in the sewers, maintaining his post even though there was nothing left to defend. Drea had died protecting the White Lady. Hegemol's armor had been stolen. Zerma had left long ago, and Isma had vanished, leaving behind only her tears. The dreamers remained asleep, their seals holding the door to the black egg closed. Even though the infection was leaking through the Hollow Knight's cracked shell, breaking the seals would make things worse, would release the Hollow Knight entirely and allow the Radiance free access to the waking world. The seals needed to stay intact, even though they were no longer truly containing the plague. It was a horrible paradox. The solution that had once saved the kingdom was now the thing that prevented any new solution from being attempted. As long as the dreamers slept, no one could reach the Hollow Knight. As long as no one could reach the Hollow Knight, the infection would continue spreading. And as long as the infection continued spreading, Hallownest would rot from within, becoming a tomb rather than a kingdom. Into this dying kingdom returned a vessel who should never have been able to return at all. One of the Pale King's children, one of the thousands cast into the abyss and deemed impure, had somehow escaped. This vessel had climbed from the abyss like the Hollow Knight before it. But where the Hollow Knight was taken by the Pale King, this one was left behind. It wandered out of Hallownest entirely, traveling to distant lands, living a life far from the kingdom of its birth. It should have remained there, should have stayed away from the ruins and the infection and the sealed god. But something called it back. Whether it was the Radiance reaching out through dreams, or the Hollow Knight itself sending a wordless summons to its sibling, or simply fate working its cruel machinery, the vessel returned. This vessel was the knight, the protagonist of the story, the tiny being in a horned shell who would descend into the ruins of Hallownest with nothing but a broken nail and an unclear purpose. The knight was small, silent, seemingly fragile. It carried no grand destiny, bore no obvious markings of heroism. It was simply another failed vessel, one of thousands, returning to the place of its birth for reasons it couldn't articulate. But this vessel would succeed where the Hollow Knight failed. This vessel would gather the strength to challenge gods, would collect the scattered powers of Hallownest, would face down the infection and ultimately confront the source of the plague itself. The knight's journey through Hallownest revealed the full extent of the kingdom's fall. In the forgotten crossroads, infected bugs attacked on sight, their glowing eyes and aggressive behavior showing how completely the Radiance had consumed them. In Greenpath, the knight encountered Hornet, daughter of Hera and the Pale King, who challenged the vessel to test its strength. In the fungal wastes, the Mantis Lord stood as one of the few tribes still maintaining their culture and discipline, having resisted the infection through sheer willpower. In the City of Tears, the knight found a civilization frozen in time. Its citizens turned to infected husks, its fountains still flowing with eternal rain. Every area told the same story. This kingdom was doomed, its fall inevitable, its former glory now just memory. But the night also found hope, or at least the tools that might lead to hope. The night discovered the dream nail, the sacred weapon crafted by the moth tribe, capable of cutting through the veil between waking and dream. The seer, the last surviving member of the moth tribe, gave this weapon to the night and urged them to collect essence, the substance that dreams are made of. The seer was filled with guilt, knowing that her ancestors' betrayal of the Radiance had led to all of this, that the infection was ultimately the moth's fault for having forgotten their creator. She saw the night as a wielder prophesied in the moth's old dreams, someone who could perhaps make amends for ancient sins. The night learned about the dreamers, the three beings whose eternal sleep sealed the door to the black egg. The path forward became clear. Break the seals by killing the dreamers, enter the black egg, confront the Hollow Knight. But to what end? Simply killing the Hollow Knight would release the Radiance entirely, allowing her full access to the waking world. That would be worse than the current situation. There needed to be another solution, another plan. The night ventured deeper into Hallownest, seeking answers in the darkest places, in forgotten memories, in dreams both literal and metaphorical. In the ancient basin, the night discovered the entrance to the abyss. Using the king's brand, the mark of royalty that proved the knight's heritage, it unsealed the door and descended into that lightless place. There at the bottom, among thousands of broken shells, the night found the birthplace. This was where it had hatched, where it had been filled with void, where it had begun its climb toward the light. Using the dream nail on an egg in the birthplace revealed a memory, countless small vessels climbing the walls of the abyss, most falling back into darkness, one reaching the top where the Pale King stood. That successful vessel looked back at its siblings falling into the dark, then turned and followed the Pale King away. The door to the abyss slammed shut, sealing the others inside. That vessel had become the Hollow Knight. The night, seeing this memory, was experiencing its own past, the moment it was left behind while its sibling was chosen. This memory, this recognition of what it was and what it had lost, transformed the night in a fundamental way. The King Soul charm, assembled from pieces found in the Queen's gardens and the White Palace, reacted to the night's presence in the birthplace. The charm shattered and reformed, becoming the Void Heart. This was no mere charm. This was the night accepting its true nature, recognizing itself as a being of void, acknowledging the darkness that filled its shell. With the Void Heart, the night became more than just another failed vessel. It became something the Pale King had never intended, a vessel that was both hollow enough to contain the Radiance and conscious enough to choose to do so. The siblings in the abyss, those shade forms that had attacked the night before, now recognized it as kin. The void itself acknowledged the night as one of its own. The night killed the dreamers. Monomon accepted her death peacefully, having fulfilled her purpose and ready for the sleep to end. Lurien fought to maintain the seal, understanding that breaking it could doom the kingdom, but ultimately fell to the night's nail. Hera seemed almost relieved, having watched her daughter Hornet through her dreams. knowing that someone was still fighting to save what remained of Hallownest. With all three dreamers dead, the seals on the black egg shattered. The door opened. Inside, chains of pale light stretched across a vast chamber, and hanging in those chains was the hollow knight, the pure vessel, its shell cracked and leaking orange light, its body racked with the infection it could no longer contain. The battle that followed was tragic beyond measure. The hollow knight fought against the night, but it also fought against itself. The radiance within was controlling it, forcing it to attack, using its body as a weapon. But the hollow knight itself did not want to fight. You could see it in the way it stabbed itself, the way it cried out in pain, the way it seemed to be trying to stop its own actions. This was a being in torment, a prison that had become a battleground, a vessel that had failed in its purpose and was now being puppeted by the very thing it was meant to contain. The knight fought back, striking with its nail, using spells, dodging attacks that came from a sibling who should have been an ally. The ending of this battle would depend on what the knight had become. If it was merely another vessel, powerful but still just a hollow shell, then the best it could do was defeat the hollow knight and take its place. Seal itself in the black egg with the radiance trapped inside. Become the new prison. Hope that it could hold longer than its predecessor. This ending, known as the Hollow Knight ending, was a victory only in the sense that it delayed the inevitable. The knight had an idea instilled too. It wanted to save Hallownest. That thought, that purpose, meant it was not pure. Eventually, it would fail just as the Hollow Knight had failed, and the infection would return again. There was another possibility. If the knight had the void heart, if it had truly united with the void, if it had become something more than just a vessel, then a different path opened. Hornet, who had been fighting to reach the temple, would arrive at a crucial moment. She would bind the Hollow Knight with silk, holding it still, exposing the crack in its mask. The knight could use the dream nail, cutting through the veil of reality and entering the dream where the radiance was trapped. Inside the Hollow Knight's mind, inside the prison that had contained her for so long, the knight would face the goddess herself. The Radiance's dream was a realm of brilliant golden light and floating platforms. She appeared as a massive moth-like being, glowing with intense radiance, powerful beyond mortal comprehension. Her attacks were brutal, beams of light and summoned swords, platforms falling away beneath the knight's feet, forcing it to climb higher and higher. This was not just a physical battle. This was a battle of fundamental forces. Light versus void, consciousness versus emptiness, the Radiance's rage versus the knight's determination. The Radiance fought desperately, knowing that if she fell here, if she was defeated in her own realm, the consequences would be final. As the battle reached its climax, as the knight landed blow after blow on the Radiance's form, something began to happen. The void was seeping into the dream. That darkness from the abyss, that primal emptiness that was anathema to the Radiance, was flowing into her realm like a tide of shadow. The knight was not alone in this fight. It had become a conduit, a gateway through which the void itself could reach this place of pure light. Tendrils of darkness rose from below, climbing toward the Radiance, seeking to pull her down into emptiness. The Radiance tried to fly higher, to escape, but the void was relentless. It caught her, wrapped around her, held her still. Then something emerged from the darkness, the shade of the hollow night itself. That small fragment of consciousness that had made the hollow night impure. That tiny spark of thought that had given the Radiance her foothold, now manifested as a shadow. It struck at the Radiance's core, that bright heart at the center of her being, cracking it open. The night's own shade, the manifestation of the void within its shell, delivered the final blows. The Radiance's light exploded outward in a burst of essence, her form shattering as the void consumed her completely. The goddess of light, the creator of the moths, the source of the infection, was destroyed. Not sealed away, not imprisoned, but actually destroyed. Her essence scattered, her presence erased from the dream realm. Back in the black egg, the infection drained away. The orange light leaking from the hollow night's shell faded. The chains binding it dissolved. The vessel that had served as a prison for so long was free at last, though what remained of its consciousness after so long containing a god is uncertain. The infection throughout Hallownest began to dissipate. Infected bugs collapsed, the orange glow leaving their eyes, though whether they would recover or were too far gone remained to be seen. The pustules of infection blocking paths throughout the kingdom burst and drained away. Hallownest was no longer doomed. The plague that had destroyed it was gone. The Radiance would never return. But victory came at tremendous cost. The night itself vanished, consumed by the void in the act of destroying the Radiance, or perhaps returned to the darkness from which it came. The hollow night was free but shattered, a vessel whose entire existence had been defined by its purpose as a prison, and that purpose was now obsolete. Hornet survived, one of the few who could witness that the infection truly ended, but she was now alone in a dead kingdom. The dreamers were dead, their sacrifice complete. The Pale King remained vanished, never to return. The White Lady lived on in her gardens, but in isolation and sorrow. Hallownest was saved, but there was almost nothing left to save. The kingdom was ruins, its population dead or fled, its civilization extinct. The Radiance's story ended in her complete destruction, but one has to wonder, what did she want? In the beginning, she was a benevolent creator, a goddess who made the moths from her own light and loved them. She didn't demand their worship through tyranny. She was simply there, a warm presence in their dreams, content to be remembered and honored. It was only when she was forgotten, when her children turned their backs on her, that love turned to rage and desperation. The infection was not the act of a monster. It was the act of a god who refused to be erased, who demanded recognition at any cost, who was willing to destroy a kingdom if that's what it took to be remembered. In a twisted way, she succeeded. Every infected bug was a proclamation of her existence. Every glowing eye declared that yes, the Radiance was real. The plague that destroyed Hallownest ensured that she would never be forgotten again. But that victory was hollow, just like the vessels created to contain her. The Radiance won her war of memory only to lose everything else. She was remembered, yes, but only as a plague, as a threat, as something that needed to be destroyed. The moths who might have remembered her with love and reverence were long gone, their tribe extinct except for the seer, who remembered the Radiance only with guilt. The kingdom that forgot her was destroyed, but so was any possibility of the worship she had once enjoyed. In forcing herself back into consciousness, in creating the infection, in lashing out with rage and desperation, the Radiance transformed herself from a beloved creator into a villain who needed to be defeated. Her refusal to be forgotten led directly to her complete erasure. The tragedy of Hallownest is that almost everyone involved was trying to do the right thing. The Pale King genuinely wanted to save his kingdom and created the vessels out of desperate necessity. The Hollow Knight tried to be pure, tried to contain the Radiance, failed not through weakness, but through the simple fact that it was capable of love and duty. The dreamers sacrificed themselves willingly to maintain the seal. The moths didn't abandon the Radiance out of malice. They simply found a new light and followed it. Even the Radiance herself wasn't evil in any conventional sense. She was a creator betrayed by her creation, a goddess who refused to be forgotten, and her rage, while destructive, was born from legitimate pain. Everyone made choices they thought were necessary. Everyone sacrificed what they believed needed to be sacrificed. And still the kingdom fell. Still thousands died. Still the infection consumed everything. The ruins of Hallownest serve as a memorial to the dangers of devotion and the price of consciousness. The Pale King gave bugs minds to think with, and those minds became vulnerable to the infection. The moths were given consciousness by the Radiance, and they used that consciousness to choose to forget her. The Hollow Knight was meant to have no mind, but it developed thoughts, and those thoughts doomed it. The Knight succeeded precisely because it was able to balance emptiness with purpose, void with will, being hollow while still having the determination to act. Perhaps that's the lesson, if there is one, that absolute emptiness is impossible, that consciousness cannot be wholly suppressed, that even beings meant to be hollow will develop some spark of self. The Pale King's mistake was thinking he could create a perfectly empty vessel. The Radiance's mistake was thinking she could force remembrance without consequence. As we drift towards sleep tonight, consider the ruins beneath our feet, the forgotten kingdoms that lie buried in darkness, the gods who rage against being forgotten, and the consequences of their rage. Hallownest fell because a goddess refused to be erased and a king tried to contain the uncontainable. It fell because consciousness is both gift and curse, because memory is both treasure and burden, because worship given can be worship withdrawn. The infection that destroyed the kingdom was golden light, the same light that had once created and sustained. The vessels meant to save the kingdom were born in darkness, children sacrificed by the thousands for a plan that was doomed from the start. And in the end, it took a hollow knight, a failed vessel, a being that should never have mattered, to do what kings and gods could not, end the infection and destroy the Radiance. The orange glow is gone from Hallownest now. The streets are dark and quiet. The rain still falls in the city of tears, but no one is there to hear it. The stag beetles sleep in their stations, waiting for passengers who will never come. Elderbug sits in Dirtmouth, wondering if the little knight will return. And deep in the abyss, in that place where light fears to go, the void remains, patient and eternal, darkness that will outlast all light. Perhaps one day, someone will rebuild on these ruins. Perhaps new bugs will descend into these halls and find the remnants of a once great civilization. Perhaps they'll wonder what happened here, what force could destroy something so magnificent. And if they're wise, they'll learn from Hallownest's fall that gods should not be forgotten, but neither should they be allowed to consume us in their demand for recognition. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the infected ruins of Hallownest. If you enjoyed this deep exploration of the Radiance and the plague that destroyed a kingdom, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Lore 2 Dream for more bedtime stories from the worlds of gaming lore. May your dreams be free of infection. May you never forget what deserves to be remembered. And may you sleep peacefully knowing that some lights, no matter how bright, can be extinguished by sufficient darkness. Sleep well, traveler. The kingdom is at rest now, and so should you be.